We are starting episode 2 with Danny. So refill that glass of wine and grab that second cup of coffee.
So something that you had mentioned earlier too, Danny, that we kind of would love to elaborate on a little bit is when you're working with these small businesses and you're kind of talking about branding, one of the things that I think industry-wide we see from the hip is that your branding is very strong and your messaging is very strong, and you're rocking your shirt today, showing your branding's on point. It's all flowing together, and I think overall, some people kind of struggle when it comes to the branding of their businesses and the branding of themselves. Do you have any kind of tips or kind of resources that you might want to share with us today about that, without giving too much away, of course? You're very good at it. So.
Happy to share. There's nothing proprietary in my brain. It's sort of my mentality there. My initial reaction, of course, is, wow, it's great to hear you say that about our branding being concise and on message, because per this other conversation we just had about continuous improvement, what I see are the deficits and the places where we should be stronger. So that's interesting to me to hear. And as a side note to that, I'd say one weird bug that we've run into is that sometimes people feel like we're bigger than we are. Like I've literally had people say, oh, I had this client and I sent them to this other photographer because they're smaller, or you guys don't seem like you need the business. And I always, in my head, freak out. It's like, no, we need the business too. Like, please, let's talk about that. Let's unpack what's going on there. I think that the kind of buzzword of the last few years was really authenticity. And I think that this past year in particular, when you think about Black Lives Matter and a lot of the other things that have gone on, I think one thing that's become really apparent is that businesses used to be scared. I think they used to be scared to be truthful about where their passions are, where some of their values are. And I do think that culturally, we've seen a shift there, where people really reward that honesty, and they want to know that, it's not just a transactional relationship that they're having with the business. They want to understand, if I support this business, what is that in turn supporting? So I think that's a good starting place, right? Is who is our company? Who am I? What do we want to represent? What are the values we hold that we want to promote? And kind of starting there and then building a brand out from that. And depending on your industry, that can take a lot of different shapes, right? There's nonprofits you can support, there's sustainability efforts, there's social justice causes that you can support. But I think just being really transparent about that landscape is so different. I think it's so cool. And I think we really owe it to the millennials and the Zoomers who are growing up, who've really made businesses understand that, like, not only is it okay to wear your heart on your sleeve, but that's important. That's a connection point. And it might be the difference. I talk about this all the time in terms of photography. Like, most people probably don't know the difference between an A+ photo and a C+ photo. Like, I'll know it when I look at that image. That's pretty apparent to me, but I've logged my hours of expertise and I get that. So what are the other pieces of your brand identity that are making up that gap for the person who's effectively seeing the same caliber of product? And that could be anything, right? That could be a whiskey. Like, if you go into a liquor store and you pull a bottle of wine off the shelf, it's almost always a brand, at least for me, I'm no wine snob. For me, it's a brand-based decision. Like, oh, that's a cool label. It makes me interested in this company and their winery. And yeah, I want to pay an extra $2 for this because of that. I think another good piece of advice that we've touched on kind of a couple times in this conversation is to seek outside opinions. When you are a business owner or you have a small company that's a tight-knit team, it's basically impossible to get an objective read on what you're doing. That could be your Instagram account, it could be your website, it could be anything, right? Your contracts and your policies. And for people who are outside of that bubble, the viewpoint is so much clearer. They have this really crystalline view that you will never get. Your view is so clouded by your own emotions and your habits and everything else. And so even though it can be a little painful, right, inviting that outside opinion and saying, hey, what do you think about this? How can I make this better? What's not clear here? That's really valuable. And so if you're willing to, take take a little bit of a psychological beating for that, that's always really worthwhile, with the caveat that sometimes you will be right and other people will be wrong. And I think that the big area where we tend to see that is when you're really branching out into new territory, kind of uncharted waters. A lot of times as a business owner or in a small business, you'll have that gut read of like, no, I think there's something there. Maybe nobody else is doing this thing, but I think it'll work. And that's an area where you can encounter a lot of pushback from people who are like, why are you going to do this thing? You're already doing this so well. Just keep doing that. Do more of that. Most of the time when we've had like big changes in our business that were really beneficial, positive changes, they are things that people universally told us not to do. Right? You're a husband and wife team. Like, why do you want to make it complicated? Why do you want to have a team that's bigger than that? Why do you want to try to do this kind of photography? Why are you bothering investing money into this equipment? So take that with a grain of salt, right?
Something that you brought up, Danny, that I had on my list that I definitely wanted to hear more about is, I've seen the workshops you've done. For some of us, we've been lucky enough to hear you teach and speak on social media and just the education behind it. And again, trying to help the old farts like myself, get our game up to par. But I'm just curious, is teaching something that you enjoy, and the speaking, is that something that you'd love to kind of develop more of in your career?
That's a really good question. What I will say is that in the moment, I love it. I love actually doing it. I love being able to share knowledge, to field questions. That part is super rewarding. It's everything leading up to it that is torturous. Like, I've known about this workshop for a couple of months, and somewhere in the back of my mind, there's been this little monster living who's like, you got this thing coming up. Have you done it yet? Have you prepared? Have you made your deck? So I really loathe that part. But then when it's happening, it's really fulfilling, and it's so different from really any other aspect of what I get to do. I think that there's education kind of internally at From the Hip, but Nina really spearheads most of that. And it's a very practical kind of like, walking through your approach in Lightroom and how you edit photos and that workflow. So this is really different. And I think maybe that's why it feels very gratifying when it's actually happening. So I'm not sure is really the answer. It's like every time I sign up for something like that, I dread it, and then I do it and it's super fun. I'm like, oh, okay. And then I'll sign up for the next one because I'm riding that high. But one thing, that does pop into my mind every once in a while is like, maybe there's a kind of longer arc to that. Maybe it's something that, if someday in the future we move on and we're no longer doing this, that could be like a fun retirement thing, or I don't know. My mom was a teacher for 50 years, and my sister is an elementary school principal who came from the classroom. So that might be hardwired in there as well.
That's such an honest answer. You're like, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. That's a to be determined.
Yeah.
So would you say that you're a little bit of a closet procrastinator, or is it maybe just when it comes to writing your content and your speaking stuff?
I am very, very much an out procrastinator. There is no closeting there whatsoever. It's always been that way ever since I was a little kid. My mom likes to tell the story of me being in elementary school and just sitting at the kitchen table refusing to do my homework. And it's how I've always operated, you know, like that was my college experience, was setting the alarm for 4 a.m. and waking up and writing the paper the morning I had to hand it in. But that's just that's how I'm wired. It's how my brain works. I don't think it's necessarily a performance under pressure thing, although that might be part of it. It's more a fact of, you know, the way that I deal with things is based on urgency. And if I know I don't have to prepare for that class until 2 weeks from now, I'm going to focus on other things in the interim. And when I get to that point, I'm going to do an awesome job. Like, I'm going to allocate the time I need to do it and do it really well. But in the meantime, let's think about other things. And, you know, thankfully, Nina, as a spouse, as a business partner, operates completely the opposite way. If she's got something that's due, she works on it immediately. She clears it off. So professionally, I think there's some yin and yang balancing happening there too. Thankfully.
You know, to kind of wrap things up, I have kind of a fairly deep question to end on. So outside, and you hit on a few causes and a few nonprofits, but like to kind of dive in that a little bit more. So outside of, obviously, you know, your work and your family, you know, what are you personally passionate about?
You know, a big one for me, which has been a really great journey over this last decade, is marriage equality. So my best friend in high school was kicked out of her house in 10th grade because she was gay, and she came out to her parents, and they had, you know, one of the worst reactions that you could have, which as a parent now is, you know, I can't begin to wrap my head around this. But that was a really just sobering, defined moment in my adolescence. This idea that through no fault of your own, you could have your parents put you on the street. And so that's something that probably since that point or before then has sort of been on my mind. But then professionally doing what we do, obviously that coalesced into something a little bit more concrete. So I'm really encouraged and heartened by all of the progress that's been made there since we started doing this almost 12 years ago. That world looks so different, but there are still those pockets of bigotry, and it makes me really sad on the one hand to think that this would even have to be a consideration for someone in planning this, you know, happiest moment of their life, that they would have to deal with that. And to, you know, I can't even tell you over the years the number of times we've gotten these questions that were asked with trepidation about, like, you know, so we're a same-sex couple, is that going to be a problem? Just the fact that that has to be on somebody's mind is ridiculous. But we've been able to do a lot of advocacy work over the years that has been super gratifying, and hopefully something that has helped to kind of push that forward. So we've had, I wrote an op-ed for the Denver Post back at the time of the Masterpiece Cake Shop case. We were part of the amicus brief in that Supreme Court case, which was really cool. So we basically got to stand in as representatives for our part of the industry and say, you know, this is why we think you should rule a certain way on this case. We've been able to testify at the state capitol a few times, thanks to a really great relationship that we have with One Colorado, which is Colorado's biggest advocacy group for LGBTQIA. And that's been really cool to be able to sit, you know, to have the microphone, to sit up there in front of representatives and have them ask you these kind of gotcha questions where they're, you know, I had one hearing, a representative was trying to equate working with same-sex couples with this scenario of, like, well, what if somebody came and asked you to film pornography for them? And I was like, well, we're not a pornography studio. You know, we photograph weddings. They're totally, and just like to equate those two things like this person was trying to do on a moral plane. It was just so absurd. But again, really like throws into relief, like that's where the mentality is for a lot of people. So marriage equality has been a big one. Education, just given my family background, we do a lot of work with Denver Public Schools and Aurora Public Schools. We have students come out to our studio to see what we do, which is always really fun because they have the best questions. Or we'll go out and we'll do speaking engagements at schools and do those Q&As. Both of those areas are really big ones for us.
Since you're so supportive of organizations, of causes, of small businesses. So my last question for you, Danny, is what can your vendor peers be doing to try to support you, especially during this time, but just overall, what can we be doing to help you? Sounds like you guys just we spit and help everywhere else. What can we do? What can we be doing for you?
Well, that's such a thoughtful and kind question. Thank you. You know, the most simple thing is just referrals, right? Especially at this moment in time. You know, our April revenue was basically a 95% drop from the previous year. So everybody's hurting right now. Everybody's working their way through this the best way they can. And for us, that's always the best thing. So one thing that we've really tried to impart is the fact that the work that we do as a studio is so diverse. We have those commercial clients, we do commercial video projects, in addition to weddings and other things that I think people think of first when they think about From the Hip. So we're always incredibly, incredibly grateful for any referral that comes our way. If for whatever reason it's not the right fit, we're always super honest about that. But the fact that we're a team here, that everybody's doing this full time, just gives us both extra bandwidth and a degree of expertise that I really feel like people can't get elsewhere. So we're always looking for more, always looking to take on more business. And then beyond that, you know, I would say maybe less of a direct help to us, but something that I see a lot of and I'm always inspired by is businesses just kind of taking a look around and seeing what other causes they can get behind locally. And that can take so many different forms. You know, for us, one of our favorite relationships is with a storytelling show based in Denver called The Narrators. It's a monthly storytelling event, and they'll have 6 people come up and they share this true story loosely centered around a theme. And we love that. We've been partnered with them for years. And one of the reasons we love it is they provide,
So this is the point where you can tell that maybe this was our first video. This is the point where we had a little technical difficulty with Danny and the rest of his interview. The sound got really distorted and sounded really terrible. So I'm going to wrap up his last question for you guys because it was really great when we asked him specifically what can we as his vendor peers help From the Hip with, because they do so much for our community. They do so much for the small businesses and for all of us. So what can we do for them? So obviously, number one, referrals. Refer them when you can. Secondarily, be engaged and be passionate about a cause or something in your community, and be involved, and don't be afraid to be involved, and just jump in there and get it. And third, the point that he was about to make was to be collaborative. He loves it when a vendor reaches out to him and maybe asks them to give him some advice. What do you think of this? I'm going to maybe do this to my brand, or I was thinking about doing this with a blog. Loves to check out that stuff for you guys, give you some insight, give you some help where he can. So make sure to check out From the Hip. Follow all their stuff. I put links to everything below in the YouTube video to all their social media pages. So make sure to follow them along because they're a lot of fun to watch. Thank you so much. Till the next one.